Hi there, you're welcome back to our Woman Crush Wednesday series. As always, I am Adeyosola Adelabo, and if you're watching this episode, you know it's a continuation from last episode. So, in the last episode, we were talking to Mrs. Jane Egerton-Idehen. She's here with us, looking pretty as always, and we could stop the conversation last week talking about how, as a woman, you can, and as an individual, generally, you can find your passion and her inspiration for writing the book. So, I'd like to ask you, in your book, you talked about rising from Ajigole to the world right now. So how would you advise people that are currently in disadvantaged situations, in disadvantaged areas and communities that have dreams, but those dreams can't just fit into where they are? They don't see themselves becoming the dreams or becoming what they actually dream to be. So how can you advise those people to break out of just their area and let their mind run wild with it?
Thank you. Which is one of the reasons I wrote the book. Because I wrote the book because I felt, this is something I wish I knew. Like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, what would I have told the younger Jane? Which is the metaphor for my daughter. Like, what would I wish she knew? And I think in that anxiety, in that fear, how would the future be? Will my dreams come to pass? Am I just wish-washing? Am I shooting over the bar? Nobody around believes you, you're isolated. And that book is like my letter to every other younger Jane. I think it's really important to be hopeful, because sometimes you're faced with a situation that you cannot see a way out, which is what is happening. You have this big dream, but you're in an environment where people can't even eat. So the basics, Maslow's law, you haven't met the basics. Yeah. Talk about you dreaming about doing whatever, changing the world. When you haven't eaten, when you come back at the end of the day, rent is owed, your neighbor has died out of poverty, and this other neighbor, they're prostituting. Like, all around you is chaotic, but you're still hoping that one day you can. So I think, for me, hope is really key, because hope for every human being keeps you going, irrespective of the circumstance you see. And the second thing I will say to them, which is one of the resounding, traits I put in the book, you have to have that ability to focus on the things you can control and just ignore the things you can't. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's Maxwell. Was it Stephen Covey's 7 Habits? I think that's one of the habits where he talks about circle of influence and circle of control. You have to learn, because it's really difficult. You don't have control over the family you're born into. So you could be born into a wealthy family, you might have a similar problem, like entitlement, but you don't have control that you were born into a famous, influential. It's the same way you have no control. You were born into a very poor family. You didn't choose your parents. So those things you can't control. Trying to blame your parents or blame the environment and blame the government doesn't solve your problem. I'm not saying they didn't make mistakes, but I'm saying that is not your circle of control. So you should not focus your energy. You should focus your energy on what you can control. And for a young person, you're going to school, your grades that you could study, and your grades, maybe your character, the people you hang out with, even the dreams you allow yourself to dream. Really, that positive attitude is so important, because that's what works for you. At least for me, that's really what worked. Not that I had everything, but I had that ability to put myself in that shield and focus on the things I can control, like way back, even while I was in. So I really got that awareness when I was in secondary school. Like, I was in a school with lots of middle class kids. And at some point, all I wanted to do is get an A like them. There are no guarantees that when I get home, I was going to get into university or I was going to get a good job. But I knew at that point, at least I could control if I could get an A or not, depending on the effort I put, who I associate with. So yeah, I focused on that. The same thing when I came out, you cannot control the fact if you get pocket money to go to university or if your parents can pay your school fees. Actually, I think my first school fees in university, I was owing it for like 2 years because I loaned it from a friend. You don't have control over that, but I had control if I could read through the hunger and the starvation and get myself good grades. And there were no guarantees that when I graduated I was going to get a good job, True. So you focus on the elements you can. And I think somehow, how the universe works, God sends you angels along the way. Like I said, I had no guarantees. I was fed by friends. I never really had money while in university to feed myself. It was friends, some very dear friends that just used to feed me. And the same, so along the way, I'm not saying all the answers will be there and the road will be easy. It's really very difficult. And it could happen both ways, that you're not poor, but maybe you're rich, but you're rich and you're still challenged that you cannot discover what you want to do. So you do focus on the things you have control over, and hopefully the others will work out.
You mentioned hope first, and right now, amidst millennials and Gen Z, there's this popular saying that is trending. It's the hope that kills, really. And how do you tell someone that has the mindset of it's the hope that kills, that it's that same hope you should rely on? Because looking at the environment which everybody is in, if you're from middle class downward, the environment isn't encouraging. If you don't have money, you know what Nigeria can be. It can be quite the hell no one wants to live in. So how do you tell a millennial or a Gen Z, a young person, basically, that in as much as the saying is it's the hope that kills, and in a way it is true actually, because you hope for something for so long and it doesn't work out, and how do you actually inspire that person to still keep hoping against all hope?
So definitely my school of thought is against hope with no hard work, because most people actually use hope as an excuse to hide behind the pain of taking a journey. And people say, oh, we are hoping. I hope it doesn't mean they're doing anything about it. It's almost like they're wishing. And if that's your idea of a hope, that's not my idea of hope. Hope is not to use that as a reason to hide behind the idea of hoping means we do nothing. And that's why we say that sometimes, why is it that it's only, we find out that people tell you, oh, sometimes success is providence. But how come it's only the hardworking ones that end up being, it gets to show that if you don't do the work, you can hope as much as you can and sit down in the room wishing and hoping it doesn't come. But it's important to have hope when you do the work, because just an attribute of human is being found that as you think, somehow that's how you shape your world. And that hope is to give you that positive mindset, because you need that element of it is possible. That's what keeps you going. If you feel it's not possible, then it's not worth trying. You just need that element of it can be done.
I can do it.
And at the time you're hoping, you don't know how. So the how is not known. It can be, it can, but you don't know the how. The how is what you discover with the hard work. So you take the baby steps, and as you start to take the baby steps and evolve, the how starts to show. So if I told you 20 years ago I wanted to be an executive, it can be done, but to the people around me it was a silly dream, and everybody laughed at it, because I hadn't even done the basics, like get a job and stop borrowing money and feed yourself, and you're talking about all these big dreams. But that hope of it can be done keeps you going. So even when you do the first job interview, it doesn't work out, and you do your job, or you get a job, you get for promotions, it doesn't work out, or you get a job, it's not a job, it's going to be a journey, it's going to be a process. You would have the highs and the lows, but it's the hope that makes you keep trying, keep knocking on different doors, keep trying. It's like water finds its level. Keep trying to find a way. If you don't have that hope, I don't think you'll try. So I'm saying don't hide behind the hope. You have to do the hard work. So if I'm going to speak to millennials, I'm like, you've got to do the hard work. If you do the hard work and you don't have a hope, it becomes a problem.
Okay.
Because you work hard, but you didn't work smart. There probably may not be any vision or where you're headed to. And you really work hard, but you were not smart enough to take all the opportunities that existed with the hard work. And somebody that was be able to take that. And that's what we want you to do, leverage that. Push the boundaries. There should be no limitation. Sweat those assets. Every God-given talent you've been given, sweat it. Don't limit yourself. It's so important.
Okay, so let's shift to something that a lot of women and girls especially are pining to know how to work around, and that's work-life balance. So you're a wife, you're a mother, and you're an executive, a successful one at that. So a lot of people always focus on how that people, women especially, have to give up careers because of home, or they give up marriages because they're pursuing a career. But then how can you marry both, or how have you married both together that you have remained successful at both ends?
In reality, do you really have work-life balance? I keep saying that. I know you could. What has worked for me is prioritization. And what I mean, you have to understand what is priority to you, and it's different from all of us. So when I came to my own to say, okay, my family, my spiritual life as a person, my career, they're all important. So these things I want to see, given priority in my life. It doesn't mean at every instance in life they are all perfectly okay.
Okay.
But it means I won't take my eyes off the ball for any of these three. So any one of them that deviates, I'll put in the work to put it back to where it should be on track. And that's what's different. Now, trying to have all of them perfect at the same time, sometimes you have to sacrifice. So I'll give you an example. To write that book, and I wrote it across a year, it means there were some times during that year I couldn't give my family the attention I wanted. I couldn't spend the amount of time I wanted with the kids. But I knew it was a priority. So what was important is to get back on track and do it. So I think priorities are very important. So you first understand your priority and make sure, because if you do that, you can easily deprioritize anything. Anything that's taking your time that's not a priority, you just deprioritize it. It's like juggling. You want to put focus on those balls that are important and deprioritize the balls that are not important. Let them drop. And it's okay. Most women find it difficult to accept that. There's a training I went for in Harvard. I still remember this training by Francis Faye, Dare to be Bad. And that's what I say to most women. It's okay to be bad. Nobody says you should be perfect at everything. Yes, you don't know how to cook. Can you afford to get a cook? Is it a priority? It's not a priority in your life or in your marriage, then why don't you get it? Can you if there are things you could outsource so that you can give priority to things that are important, then outsource it. What's important is that you put your eyes on the ones that are important. And what's important to me might not be the same for you. The same thing in your marriage with your kids. What's more important? Spending quality time with the kids, or just, it doesn't matter if it's quality time or no quality time. You just want the kids to be. You have to really define what is priority for you. Once you define it, that's what you start to focus on. So I would say for me, for example, priority is not spending 10 hours with my kids. It's spending maybe 2 hours with them, maybe quality hours, where I give them all the full interaction, attention, so they get to know who I am and I get to know who they are. But I can spend 10 hours with them and I don't give them that. They're just around in the corner playing games. So yeah.
So I'm aware that you do volunteering with women and girls to help them steer their careers in STEM. So can you enlighten us more on what you do in that space, really?
So I have a passion for girls, young girls in STEM. Also people that are underprivileged, and because of my roots, there's a tendency to, have a passion to want to help them. And for girls, because of my journey as a woman in STEM, you tend to have climbed that ladder, and you see that one of the issues you had, first of all, we had a pipeline issue, fewer girls coming to STEM. Then we had an issue where even the industry wasn't keeping that. So you see a lot of them drop midway. So I really am passionate about making sure women remain in their career of choice. It doesn't even have to be STEM. But it doesn't mean that because you're married, you have kids, you have to give away if it's important to you. So, and with that, I did start a non-profit, Women and Career. That's what we really do. Support women in their careers, support young girls that want to grow a career or start a career, and actually get to teach them how they could do that. So yeah, that's a big passion of mine.
So since you work with women, what are your 5 key success tips for success, basically, for women in STEM and in general in career as well? So what are like the 5 practical tips? Now there's a lot of aspire to Magoya things going on online, and there's a lot of Monday motivation this and but then by the time you begin to implement those things, you see that they're not actually sustainable and they're not as practical, because when you put them in real life situations, they just crumble. There's no depth to them. So 5 tips that have actually worked for you that you would like to pass on to other women.
I can share 5 tips, but I think success is, because first of all, you have to define what is success to you, I think that's so important, because success to one person is buying a car, living in a part of town, having a certain education. Success to another, just having a loving family around them all the time, or having friends that support them. And success to other maybe might be having a good travel experience and be able to afford or have a lifestyle they can fund irrespective of, So that's very important, because if we define it, then we don't get it confused about, what we're using as a benchmark. Defining success, I'll say for me what has worked. So I say that because it doesn't mean it has to work for everyone. But I'll share one of my experiences. One of the first things I said is really getting to know who you are. So personal leadership really works for me because it helps you define your space, understand yourself, and then determine the journey you want to take. If you don't know that, I don't know how you're going to function. The greatest leaders I've seen are the leaders that are really self-aware. They tell you, this is what I'm good at, this is not what I'm good at. And they don't really try to function in what they're not good at. Most people you see that are successful are those that have found that niche they're good at. And they really throw everything at it. And I give that in different examples. So it's really important you understand that for yourself and then what you're all about. That's really important. Other things I would like to say, I think it's always good to have like a vision. I know it's sounding a bit fluffy because I even had a presentation about, the fluffy presentation, because people want to hear other things like, these are the things, if you wake up in the morning, do this.
Exactly.
And I'm like, you know why I don't say that? Because it differs. Based on your personality, a lot of these things differ. If I'm a morning person, wake up in the morning and doing all these things work. If I'm not a morning person, I'm a night person, then it's better you do those things at night. Personalities as well. If I'm extroverted, then doing all those social interactions heavy works for you. If you're not, so I'll say do have the vision. The vision is important because it's been shown time and time again that most people that can see it tend to have the ability to also achieve it. If you can't see it, you have no direction. It's always difficult. Even when the opportunities are around you, you can't see them because you were never intentional about them. So I'll say it's really good to do that. Habits like goal setting has always worked for me. I think about goals I've set way back to like 20 years ago. I used to always, every year, I would set my goals. And there's this thing about goals, it's not like everything tends to happen immediately, but I think it kind of forces your energy to focus on what's important to you. And with time, it gives you like, I don't know, focus. There's a magic about goals. So make them, they're smart, measurable, just the right things. But if you do have goals, it gives you direction. You're not clueless. You're not swayed by the crowd. So the fact that everybody's doing something doesn't mean you have to do it. If it's not aligned to your goals, why are you doing it? So I say things like goal setting, really helps. I talk about, having a vision and, personal leadership. I think those are things that will, because I think with those, every other thing kind of fits in. So I'll give you an example. If your vision is to build a multi-million-dollar industry or to have a global stage, your goals start to align to that. And your goals will not determine the things you chase, where you focus your energy, where you invest your money, the kind of trainings you choose for yourself, even sometimes with the kind of friends you network with,
So you mentioned that in your work with, in working with women and girls, that a lot of them start off in STEM careers, but then they just fall off with time and stuff. As a woman in STEM, what has been your limitations really as a woman in STEM? Has being a woman itself been a limitation to how far you've been able to go, or has it posed a problem at any time? Have you lost a deal, or have you been looked down on because you're a woman in STEM at any point?
Of course. Of course, just think about the environment we exist in. So I show up in a boardroom with a team of 10 men to have a meeting with a client. And the client is trying to figure out who's the boss. Because in his head, it can't be that only woman in the room. It has to be somebody else. I show up in a restaurant, a fancy restaurant, with a team of expatriates. And the waiter is looking for who's going to pay the bill. It definitely is not going to be this woman. So he wouldn't even give you attention. He takes your order last. He's not keen to take your order. Like everybody's asking, have you taken her order? He's more interested in, this other, let's say white-skinned guy. I better take this guy's order. Until the guy tells him, that's the lady paying the bills. You better go take her order. You're giving me more attention. So you see that show up time and time again. I'm trying to say you can show up in different circles, in different ways. Even sometimes in offices. Colleagues will feel like, oh, she's not having kids. Maybe we shouldn't give her something difficult. And that's bias, The fact that a woman is pregnant doesn't mean her brains have disappeared. They're still intact. She's as smart as you can get. Her body might be slower because she's heavier. Doesn't mean the brains. And really what we do is solve problems. So you see sometimes some of these biases tend to work against women. They go from maternity, they come back. Everybody gets a promotion, you don't get it. Everybody gets the salary rise. Some people kind of forgotten you. You're like in a black hole. You're not trying to rediscover yourself. So you tend to see sometimes these biases work, and that's why I speak against it. I tell people that my job is now more than my job. It's not a matter of just having a job. I think it's a platform. I think you're there to keep the door open and remain open so that other people like you have access to the table.
So earlier you mentioned that. I've forgotten what you mentioned.
Is it now we were talking? Because we've said so many things.
We have said
And
so
we
many
can still
things.
say some more. Because I remember when you were talking, I was like, oh my, I wish I also, because I wanted to say, one of the things I've also found, when you talk about 5 things about being successful, and I talk about vision and goal setting and personal leadership. But one of the things I learned also in that journey, or my journey, is the ability to speak out and speak up, because I feel most women don't do it. I was having lunch with someone just here before I came. We're talking about, sometimes the struggles, you see overqualified women, but they're kind of shortchanging the opportunities they get because people don't have that ability to ask. And I see that, I also share that in the book. Sometimes because of culture, a woman has been trained to be on the receiving end. Someone has to ask you on a date. Someone has to ask to marry you. Then you show up in the office, think people are going to ask to give you
the
say,
role.
do you want to be promoted? Do you want this role? That's not happening. The workplace is entirely different. You go for what you want. It's not the reverse. People don't come and say, hey, Shala, are you interested in this role? You can get it one in maybe 100, but most times it's the reverse. People say, I like this opportunity. I think I can contribute to it. I might be interested to work with you on this project. I'm thinking of this as my next career stage. And most women they feel kind of uncomfortable because it almost feels like selling yourself to a man. Nobody goes to a man and say, hey, I like you. I'm thinking you might find me attractive. No woman thinks that is the right approach. But that's not how it works in the workplace. In the workplace, you sell yourself. You position yourself. Any language you want to use, but you have to show the intentionality that you wanted. And I want most women to understand that, because when people ask me, I'm like, yeah, you gotta speak up, you gotta ask. Most times people are creating a whole different conclusion or idea about you and your future until you speak up and say, hey, it's okay. If the job role is Madagascar, I want to go. Because people are sitting there and saying, oh, Jane cannot go to Madagascar. She's got kids. Let's look for another candidate. And maybe Jane really wants to take the role.
So yes, I remember what I was about to say. You talked about how the environment can actually limit you as a woman in STEM. So I wanted to ask actually, that is it just specific to the Nigerian environment or globally as well? Is it better on a global scale, or it's just as hard for a woman in STEM?
I think sometimes in most countries, the better thing, sometimes you have what we call the Western world or the first world. Sometimes the awareness is there, so companies are actually looking out for that bias. So they are more intentional to say, hey, in an interview, please don't ask the woman how many kids she's going to have. It's got nothing to do with the job, or ask her, is she thinking of getting, they are more aware, so they are looking out for the bias. But sometimes we have environments like ours where there's nothing to protect you from that. So you can have a case where you go to an interview and people are actually asking you, so you're not married, are you dating someone, are you thinking of getting married soon? And maybe it's got nothing to do with the job, but in their heads they're calculating when she's going to go to maternity, maybe we shouldn't recruit her, she's thinking of getting married next year, she might get, and those I've sat on boards, and that's the kind of conversation that comes up. I'm like, wow, it's got nothing to do with the interview. We're talking about skill sets. Why are we talking about engagement? So that's why I said sometimes the environment also doesn't support. When you have, sometimes it's patriarchy, those kind of cultures tend to promote a gender having preference. And when that gender has preference, sometimes they overlook other genders. So in decision making, and people try to bring that into the work culture, because it's a certain gender, they will give that preference. Or because it's a certain gender, people believe that this other gender shouldn't be more interested because these are the roles that are more, you see cases where we say, why don't we have women in more line management position? Why is everybody in HR or communications? Why don't we have them even in the cores of your business when it's not HR or communication? Because they can still do it. It doesn't stop them from doing it. So that's why you see that tend to seep in.
So I'm going to ask you if you consider this myth true. Do you believe that, it's a myth that is popular, that women in STEM are antisocial, they are geeky, they're overly serious, they're not approachable, they're more to themselves and things like that?
Do you think so too? Like I didn't come here looking geeky. I'm wearing always top red dress with high heels. No, I think it's just a myth.
It's
I
just a
think
myth.
in the early days, a lot of women felt to fit in, they had to be like the predominant gender. And you see that in the Queen Bean syndrome. So in the early days, the first few women to hit management almost behaved like men. They were afraid to bring some of the key traits, your ability to nurture, empathy into their leadership. They thought they had to be tough and bully everybody and dress like the other gender. Now we're seeing that it's got nothing to do with your work. You could approach the same work with it. You can use a different approach for the same job and give us results. So it's really a myth. I don't think people can be nerds irrespective of their sector, and people can decide to be nerd and change. Because I know in the early days in my career I was more nerdy, and I was more intentional to change that outlook because that's what I knew, and not because I was an engineer. I think it was more because of my dad, because he had given me an idea of, the idea that you have to show no interest on maybe material or aesthetics or external things. What's more important is your intellect. So I predominantly prioritize that as the only important thing, and everything doesn't have to be important, but it doesn't have to be. I think you should bring your feminine parts. That's the diversity we're looking at. That's what makes you. If not, who will make the nice shoes? Who will make sure that when we make AI, it's for all genders. We need women in those sectors so that we also influence the sectors. So when we make solutions, when we make codes, when we make apps, we make it for all genders.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that you yourself, you were nerdy and geeky, and then you changed, you were intentional about it. So how do you advise women who have been put in this box and want to build personal brands that does not conform to this kind of myth? How do you advise them to go around building a personal brand that is actually more open to possibilities and life than just being nerdy and geeky?
I think always starts with the first, where you're going to, the whole vision. Like, how do you want this brand to be? Or what do you associate with the brand? You might not be able to sometimes explicitly explain, but you can use a picture. That's what we do with a vision or a mood for like, this is how I would like it to be. Then I think you start the journey of understanding what it would take. So if it's in the way you communicate or in the aesthetics of your brand, so the way you look, the way you dress, how you want to be seen in those elements. You can start, everything can be taught. I believe I was taught to dress, how to make my hair, how to do makeup. So I feel everything can be taught. How you want to communicate, how do you want to present? How do you want your presence to be in a room? Body language. How do you, exude that executive presence? How do you create command of your space? You can be taught all that. But I feel you have to first want it. Because if we're teaching you don't want it, there's no commitment to do it. But if you want it, there's materials out there on the web, there are consultants that do this. I was lucky enough, my journey started with maybe like a mentor trying to help me. Not even himself, because he was a guy, but he was introducing me, okay, talk to that person, she's good at dressing. She'll tell you how to dress. Talk to that lady, she's very good at how she composes herself or how she walks into a room and create presence. And sometimes, I know sometimes it's easier with some personalities, but I believe everything can be adapted to your style. While I will have my own way of creating it, you would have your own way of creating the same.
So in economics, you're taught that scarcity makes something more expensive. It increases demand for it because it's scarce. But then you look at women in tech. There's a scarcity of women in tech, yet they're not they're not valued per se, and you almost don't see them. And you think that when there's a scarcity of something, then everybody's eyes is on it. Like, diamonds are scarce. Everybody's like, I want diamonds, and then it glows. But then women in tech, you're just on the side, on the sidelines, which shouldn't be actually. They should be celebrating, and that's what the show is all about, celebrating women in tech. But then how can women in tech actually break through all these barriers and be more visible to other people?
I'll say they have, but let me speak to your theory. There's a counter theory by Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you know Malcolm Gladwell.
No.
And it talks about moral licensing. So the fact that it's like when I've obliged you to do something, even though you really don't want to do it, but because you have no option, you will do it to tick the box and tell me you've done it. So think about your boss insisting every morning, you need to show up at 8. And maybe you really don't want to show up at 8, You want to show up at night because you believe you can still, but you will show up at 8 so that they see you at 8. Doesn't mean that you do anything productive between 8 and 9. So that's the theory of moral license. So he believes the fact that there's been a lot of pressure for companies to ensure that they diversify, that women are more present in STEM. Sometimes people do it as a token. So they're like, oh, we've hit the quota. We say 10% on the board. We found 10 women, or we found 1 woman and put them on the board. And after that, it looks like the door is shut. And you see that assault also with racism, when you're trying to make sure that other races are present. Once we're giving that token to a 1, we don't want to give to another. Once the company feels we've met that demand, we've got to. If you go to my department, a couple of girls, I say there's a girl, that's a girl, and or a couple of women, they feel like we don't have to make any effort anymore. So that's the theory of moral licensing. That once people feel they've met that, primary effort. But if it's really something you're passionate about, it's not something you're trying to tick the box. It's something you want to continuously happen. So that could be a reason why we don't have that scarcity bringing that value, because the scarcity is actually artificial. People are just choosing the ones to meet the required minimum barrier, and then they let it go after that. In terms of my theory, I think it takes 2. So I don't think it's only about women being visible. The truth is that we do have very capable women there. Because initially we thought it was a pipeline problem. We don't have enough women. We need more girls. So that is actually, I'm not saying it doesn't still exist. I think we even have a bigger problem. The ones we have, what have we done with them? The women that did go and study STEM, where are they? How are we making sure that in the workplace we keep them? So we are complaining the pipeline is 10%. So out of every 100 male in STEM, we have 10 women. The 10 that make it to the workforce, where are they after 10 years? Sometimes you only have 1. I don't think, we also have to realize that the way the universe, our world is created, some of these things we're almost faulting women for. They don't have control over it. In a relationship, you don't have control over the fact that if you're the woman and you have a guy, you're the one that gets pregnant. It's not something you can say, okay, I get pregnant now, next time you get pregnant. It's always the woman that has to get pregnant and have this baby and go on maternity. But sometimes it seems that we're penalizing them when they come to the workplace for that. She goes the first time, you grumble, but the second time you find out that you deprioritize her work, you take, so those are the kind of things I think that it's also making it difficult for women to try. We have to put things in place intentionally if you want to have women, because they're not doing that because they don't love the job. Most of these women love their job. They want to be there. They just don't want to be full-time housewives. It's not every woman that wants to be a full-time housewife.
We have many women,
but sometimes the workplace is making sure that they don't stay. So that's what we have to do, make the environment conducive for them to stay. And we wouldn't lose talent, because they're very talented.
That's good to know. So we're rounding off this session and this interview, and we have just 2 more questions for you, really. If there's something throughout the length of your career you could do over, you could do again, or if there's something you could take back and not do, what would that one thing be?
Like they say, you have no regrets, isn't it?
Really?
And I do not have any regrets, because I feel that's what makes the journey unique. But I think if there's something, I think I shouldn't be afraid to speak out more. I would have loved to, because the whole time in my career I was silent for almost like 10 years. Because this little quote about we are afraid of who we can be, of our own powers, I think I had a phase like that. I was too afraid of what I could be. And I was more interested in shrinking myself. I just want to live a quiet, basic life. Nobody has to, I just don't want to just hide under the table, do my thing and disappear. And if I had to do it again, I think that phase I'll probably do it differently. I think having kids really has changed my perspective, that it's really more than you. Some of the things you do, you see it differently, your perspective, because it's more than you, it's what you want to leave behind for your kids. How do you want them to remember their mom? What do you want to equip them with? And the best you can give them is the life you live. That's what I feel. Because that's what I think about when I think about my parents. I'm like, oh, my dad would have done this, my mom would have done this. I'm challenged by the feats that my dad achieved or my mother achieved. I'm actually driven by it. So I think I probably would have spoken out more and just be out there more.
And just to add, I'd like to tell you that a closed mouth is a closed destiny. So
That's one of your nice proverbs.
Okay, so I would like you to say something to the woman, to the girl with big dreams, who is afraid of their dreams, just like you were, like you said, so you were afraid of what you were going to become or what you would actually become. So, what's your one word of encouragement? I don't want you to tell me. I want you to tell.
So to that woman with the amazing dream out there, and the young girls with amazing dreams, I would say get out of your way. That's my only advice. You know, I don't think people are going to limit you because you have what it takes to be successful. I think you're the only one that can give them permission to limit you. So get out of your own way. Stop worrying about what people think and how they see you and how they want to perceive you, or the box they want to put you in. Go full blast, and then they'll catch up with you.
Wow. This interview has been so enlightening. I'm still struggling to catch up with everything you said. Thank you so much, Mrs. Jane, for coming, for being a part of our series. We hope you've been inspired. We hope you've learned one or two things, and that you stick with us. Watch out for more episodes because it could only get better. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day. Bye.
And